Unit 731 was a clandestine biological and chemical warfare development facility established by the Imperial Japanese Army in 1936 during the Second Sino-Japanese War, under the rule of Emperor Hirohito. Going by different code names like Manchu Detachment, Camo Detachment, and Ishi Unit, Unit 731 was tasked with researching and developing effective biological and chemical weapons for the Imperial Japanese Army to use against its enemies. This would of course completely violate the Geneva Convention rules established in 1925, but that was sort of the point since the Japanese only took that as a sign of their effectiveness. Unit 731 carried its studies out in Manchuria, a northeast region of China, and operating out of the capital of Heilongji. Under the disguise of being a lumber mill, this research team would perform deplorable studies on human test subjects, men, women, and children alike. The researchers would refer to the victims as logs and house them in log cabins, which is just a fluffy name for prison cells. The experiments carried out by the group varied but never lacked malice. One experiment, known as dehydration testing, had victims starved and steamed to a mummy-like state to measure the percent of liquids in the body. If you ever wondered how we know 70% of the human body is water, there's your answer. It's said that a small number of these poor men, women, and children who became marades were also mummified alive in total dehydration experiments. They sweated themselves to death under the heat of several hot, dry fans. At death, the corpses would only weigh 1/5 their normal body weight. Another gruesome experiment carried out by the group involved flying over Chinese cities, get ready for this one, spreading ticks infected with the bubonic plague. These experiments had a devastating effect on the surrounding populations due to the widespread range and nature of the attacks, and were the cause of the majority of fatalities. During the trial, the accused, including Major General Kiyoshi Kawashima, testified that as early as 1941, some 40 units of Unit 731 airdropped plague-contaminated fleas on Chengda, China, causing epidemic plague outbreaks. This may not come as a shocker, but researchers themselves weren't immune to being test subjects. One member, known as Yoshi Soto, contracted the bubonic plague and was subjected to a live dissection by his fellow researchers, also known as a vivisection. Soto had a few days previously been interested in talking about women, but now he was as thin as a rake with many purple spots over his body. A large area of scratches on his chest were bleeding. He painfully cried and breathed with difficulty. I sanitized his body with disinfectant. Whenever he moved, a rope around his neck would tighten. After Soto's body was carefully checked by the surgeon, I handed a scalpel to the surgeon, who, reversibly gripping the scalpel, touched Soto's stomach skin and sliced downward. Soto shouted, "Brute!" and died with this last word. What's more shocking was that not all the experiments done necessarily had a purpose. The researchers would get curious about things and just test them out. One of the methods described of securing samples for study include holding down a prisoner of war as a guard bashes their head in with an axe to retrieve their brain, which doesn't even sound like an effective way to study a brain considering the whole bashing head open part, but I'm no pathologist, so what do I know? It's recorded that Unit 731 had around 3,000 staff members, and among them the leading researcher in the group was General Shida Ishii, who played a great hand in the acts against humanity. One of his adamant supporters was Colonel Chikahiko Koizumi, who had a fascination with the German application of chlorine gas during the World War I, and is also known to have published many scientific peer-reviewed journals in which he described the subjects being tested on as Manchurian monkeys, or long-tailed monkeys. Fun fact, there aren't even monkeys in Manchuria. Let that sink in. Unfortunately, Koizumi was never brought to justice because he committed seppuku once he was charged with the war crimes rather than let the Allies capture him. Among all the experiments, dehydration testing, frostbite testing, blood transfusions, live dissections, plague testing, STD testing, exposure testing, it's recorded that no one ever survived these tests, and even if they did, they were subjected to live dissections or simply killed to hide the evidence afterwards. There was only one documented attempt to escape this hell on earth. A Russian man took matters into his own hands by surprise attacking a researcher while faking ill. He grabbed the researcher's keys and proceeded to open some cells along the corridor, which unfortunately didn't get him and others too far, as they were shot dead on the spot. Knowing what you know now, it's probably safe to assume that when the Allies got their hands on these researchers, they were punished to the full extent of the law, right? Resembling Project Paperclip, these researchers were forgiven by the United States government and even given jobs to continue researching on their behalf. The only known members of Unit 731 to even remotely face justice were the 12 researchers prosecuted by the Soviet Union in the Khabarovsky war crime trials. The sentences didn't really reflect the crimes committed, as the max sentence received by some of the researchers was 25 years in a Serbian labor camp, of which they served 7 years max, and other sentences were as short as 2 years. During the trials, the United States government refused to acknowledge the crimes committed by the researchers, and even went as far as to label the Khabarovsky war crime trials as communist propaganda. The Soviets, of course, claimed that the United States had been dismissive of the crimes due to the information forfeited by the unit upon capture. There's a lot more I didn't cover in this video, but I wanted to keep it short. If you found any of this interesting, I highly recommend you take a moment and read up on the unit yourself. I'll leave my source in the description. Thank you for watching, and stay educated.